It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shanté.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by The Norfus Firm. At The Norfus Firm, we solve people problems. We work with employers all around the world on HR and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And for the first time, I'm looking in the right camera because I never know where to look. And I finally had enough courage to ask. So, yeah, I mean, for those of you who watch on YouTube, you will see that I probably look like I'm looking all around the sky sometimes, but today I got it together. I got it together, guys, slowly but surely. All right, so we're back for part two of talking about building global DEI strategies. We are so glad to be rejoined by Charlene Brown of Howlett Brown, who is a DEI practitioner, HR expert, employment lawyer like me in the UK. And really happy to have you back, Charlene. So when we're thinking about how we sort of began this is DEI a US issue? We've heard that a lot. People think it's a US issue, but it's really DEI is something that is universal. It may show up in different ways. You may approach it differently in different places. In this episode, we want to start thinking about, okay, we know it's a global issue. We know we got to think about when we're building DEI strategies for multinational companies, that we're thinking about it from beyond just, the home country standpoint. And so we want to talk a little about the considerations. I'll just tee up that, and I'd love for you to chime in, and then we'll kick it over to you, Charlene. I think the very first consideration is mindfulness.
100%. All day.
And we talk about this a lot, and we will continue to talk about it a lot, because the thing about mindfulness is it gives you the freedom to know you do not have to be an expert in 100% of everything that is going on in the countries that your employees are in, but you're thoughtful about the fact that you're not only thinking about it from your own lens. Right? What do you think about that?
I mean, it has to start with the mindfulness, because you have to slow down. You have to really pull it back, like slow down and really take that view of, okay, what do I have in front of me? And what's happening here? So the pause, the slow down, we're going 1,000,000 miles a minute all the time. But in order to really, for what we do, center people and be considerate and work in integrity, you have to slow it down, at least initially,
right,
to get a sense of what's going on, and then get present to what are the issues. Then you can devise a strategy and move forward and do what you need to do. But the mindfulness piece is key, because you got to slow down.
Yeah, because it becomes really, really easy to judge before you actually learn and understand. And Charlene talked about the idea of wanting to understand where people are coming from, which is huge for us too. And I mean, a quick example there, we had done a listening session with employees, and there was a debate, especially in the Netherlands, around the use of a character called Black Pete. And Black Pete is essentially like Santa's helper. But when you look at it from an American lens, Black Pete has blackface. And there's definitely a conversation going on about that in the Netherlands, which we learned from one of our colleagues. And in this listening session, that topic came up, and a woman said, oh, well, Black Pete makes the kids smile. And my initial reaction was like, it's blackface. But I didn't react that way, because I paused and said, I'm a visitor to this conversation. I am not from the Netherlands. I don't have the perspective of growing up with this character and that character meaning something for me. So this is an opportunity for me to listen and learn. It's not an opportunity for me to challenge her view, because we would be having two different conversations.
Right. Exactly.
So Charlene, when you're thinking about, the sort of considerations for building a strategic plan for a multinational company, what are some of the other things that you advise clients to think about?
Yeah, there's lots of things, and some of them align with pretty much what you've both said there. I mean, the first thing is, we call it our core code. It's looking at the structural, procedural, and experiential aspects of what's going on in the organization. The easiest analogy to give it to you is a car engine. which is hilarious for me because I don't know really a lot about cars. But if you imagine the structure is the outer shell of the engine, right, which is the working, the mapping, the structure of the organization, what it's supposed to do, how it's set up. The procedure part is, for a car, it's the fuel, whatever you put in to make it drive, which is the processing, the policies, the outworking of that structure. And then the experience, if it's a car, it's how it drives, right? But from a workplace perspective, it's how you experience the outworking of that structure through its policies, through its decision making, and through its actions. Now, if we go back to an engine, if you're supposed to have petrol and you put diesel and the car doesn't even start, then the experience is taking you nowhere. Likewise, if you have a dent in your infrastructure and it's leaking something out, how is it supposed to be sustainable? So the organizations, one of our first recommendations is to look at all those three and think about what's happening. The other aspect of it is to, you said mindfulness, we say thoughtfulness, in terms of considering that there's a bigger picture at play here. And I hope this is not classed as cursing for your podcast, but you've got to leave your own shit at the door, right? It's not about you, it's about everybody. So what do I need to know? How do I need to know what's going on? And how do I drive it that way? And then the plan, you also need to consider how you infuse whatever your strategy is with the outworking of the organizational objective. So if it's a commercial business, if it's a mission-driven business, how can you bring them into alignment? Because often organizations suffer when their DEI is over here and their commercial strategy is over there. And then I think last but by no means least, what are you ready for? Because you can't have perfect, it's a misnomer, it's not obtainable, but you can't do everything you want in a heartbeat. You need to build up to be ready for some of those things. So the journey an organization might think, they might think it might take them a year. It would likely take them 5. And that stuff has to be built on, tested, learn, understand, refresh, redefine, and move forward in a staged process.
Wow. It's so powerful for so many reasons. The one thing I really want to highlight from what you've just shared is the time piece. I think that being realistic about what it takes to get where you need to be is really, really critical, because I think that, and we've talked about this too, is like when George Floyd was murdered, there was a flurry of activity around the world, right? I mean, we saw protests around the world. We saw brands and companies getting more specific about what they were going to do, instead of just this, we stand and we stand with this community. Like, the statements were getting more meaningful and purposeful. And then there was the flurry of activity, and then people are frustrated and they're like, nothing's happening. Mm-hmm. And, I think I equate it to like working out, where it's like the weight you are trying to lose didn't happen overnight. So going to the gym one time is not going to be something that, gets you to where you want to be weight wise or physically, right? And more importantly, even when you get to your ideal weight, you still have to work out, right? Like, you don't just stop.
And working out's only one part of it. It's really the nutrition. So you're not even doing the real thing that you're supposed to be doing.
So if we tie that back.
And continuing on that as well, just because you walk through the doors of the gym doesn't mean you've done anything either. So you can talk all you want, but if you aren't rolling it out into action, it means nothing.
Exactly. So if we get out of analogy world and bring that into like what we really mean, is that showing up is the first step, but understanding, going through exactly what you're talking about of, we got to start from the top here. Where are we? Where are your policies? How are your people experiencing those policies? Where are your leaders in their journeys? That part takes time, right? To go through and take stock of where you are. So this idea that like right away, you're going to have way more representation in your leadership ranks, or right away, people are going to love you and feel like they want to stay here, is unrealistic. So I think what I take away, Charlene, from what you shared is, let's be realistic about what's possible, because that helps to avoid, the burnout of people feeling like it's not happening fast enough.
To create an impactful diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, you need expertise. And that's exactly what the Norfus Firm provides. The Norfus Firm comprises an alliance of consultants with decades of experience in DEI strategy, HR services, executive recruiting, and more. Learn more about all of our services at thenorfusfirm.com. And so I have a question, or elaborating on that, Charlene, when you're looking at it. So that's what you have to do in general, right? Like we have to do that everywhere, wherever, if you're running an organization, you have to do that. But then things get complicated when we're talking about global workplaces and workforces. So what are the additional considerations that need to be applied when you're thinking about like an international workplace?
Yeah, so all those things that I said kind of at the organizational wide lens, and then the next layer is, okay, how are these out working culturally, socially, economically on the ground? What's happening? What are the drivers in those countries that are destabilizing safety, trust, a sense of belonging? How do they impact and show up in our workplace? Because, whether for a long time, there's this whole debate about, well, this is an employer. We can't be responsible for everybody's lives. And I get that. But the reality is the outside world is so challenging now and so fraught in many different ways. It's feeding into the workplace. People are seeing what's happening outside and they're talking about it inside. It's making it your business in that sense. Mm-hmm. And that's separate to how the organization, how staff experience the organization. And I think you need to pay attention. We had a client once ask, they want to collect data. So one of the biggest things one of the biggest things organizations say holds them up, because I don't think it should hold them up, is accessing demographic data, is understanding your workplace, right? There are different laws in different countries to the extent you can and can't collect. But even if you can get over that and you can collect, there are certain cultures and certain countries where the idea of collection, the idea of identifying is new, or it's unfamiliar, or it doesn't feel safe. There are some countries where colorism is fraught and people don't feel like they can declare and identify themselves as Black. So if you throw that out now as a global survey, people are either going to lie or they're not going to do it. And that they're going to question your intentions even more. So there's no point in doing it at that time. What your time is better well spent understanding the level of trust that you have to build to get people ready for that, and how you take them all on the journey with you. I think you also need to understand the dynamics with global organizations, depending on their industry and their sector and their origins. There's issues of colonialism, there's dominant powers, and when you are a smaller office, an international office from a headquarter, whether you like it or not, some people feel like those people don't have autonomy. Those groups in those countries don't have them. You have to pay attention to that. How do you get everybody on board? How do you find alignment, and how do you take them on the journey with you? And recognizing you don't know everything. So you need other people to help you show the way.
That's fantastic.
What are you thinking about that building trust piece? Because we've seen the data collection issues as well. And it was interesting because we had a client who really insisted on still asking the demographic questions. And it was so off-putting to some of the employees in other countries. I think you know what I'm talking about there. What do you think could have been done differently now that we know what we know in terms of thinking about the trust piece?
Wow. Well, I think part of it is the saviorism thing that comes up, or the paternalistic thing that comes up, where we think we know more or better than what we know or don't know. It's like everyone and everything is operating from some sort of information deficit.
Right.
Always. We never have all the facts.
Yeah.
Never. So it's like I think, maybe taking a step back and to Charlene's point, hey, okay, so what is the dynamic here? Right. What is happening? What's going on? And what is the best way to build trust? Because all of this hinges on trust. So, and I'm so glad that you brought that point in, Charlene, because none of this, it all falls down if there isn't any trust built, because it's about relationships. It's about people. It's about connecting with people. And if I don't trust you, I don't care.
And our identity is probably one of the most personal things that we have, right? So personal. Who you see yourself as, who you show up as, is such a personal thing and a personal choice, right? How you choose to share that information is so...
And who you choose to share it with.
Right. And so I think when you think about it from that perspective, and Charlene's point around like maybe you don't go for the jugular from the beginning and collect demographic information is like sometimes, and again, this brings it back to thoughtfulness, mindfulness, like especially when it's coming from the US, we're very used to having to give that information. When you apply for a job, you're putting all that information. When you are onboarded to the job, you put in all that information. But it's like, that's a place to pause. Do they do this everywhere else? Do they so freely give of their demographic information somewhere else? And again, I think that comes down to all the mindfulness piece of research. Right? Make sure you have resources to at least get people to start to give you some preliminary information about what's going on. Talk to people in those countries. I think that was one of the most humbling experiences for us because we were talking to folks in, Nairobi and Brazil and Finland and all of these countries that we are not from. And it was like, we came to it like a visitor. Like, what would you want people to know about how you work here? What would we see in your headlines? Things like that, where you're being truly curious to understand like sort of what they're dealing with.
100%.
Definitely. And the example that I was thinking about, it was a Central American or South American country, and the category of Black had only been on their kind of social, kind of societal, governmental demographic survey for the past 5 to 10 years. And most people would declare themselves white because they felt that they couldn't get job opportunities. Mm-hmm. So that in itself is enough not to start collecting. It's better you spend time to understand exactly what is happening. It's probably not time for this show because I could be here all day, but one of the things I find that is probably one of my bugbears is the meaningful approach versus the glamorizing of it as well. Events, sure, to generate awareness, and language and terminology, sure, there has to be a level of understanding, but let us not get distracted by that when the real issues are changing the experiences that some people have that are entirely unsafe. So you're over here trying to figure out what you call something, but the reality is this is a person who has a name and is more than one thing, because we look at things intersectionally and their experiences are a big problem. That needs to change. But I can get on my high horse about that, so I'll stop there.
I love a soapbox.
We love a soapbox too. You can get on a soapbox with us over here. So again, I think this is a nice segue into episode 3. And so just to sort of summarize here, I think regardless of where your home country is, when you have a multinational company, we're going to start with mindfulness or thoughtfulness, right? Like what are the considerations that we need to think about? Where are people? How many are in different places? Where we can find some commonality, right? And frankly, where you can give sometimes employees in other countries that might have a smaller showing an idea to come up with what they need, and leave room for local planning, and it doesn't have to all be centralized. And then this idea of pausing and being realistic about how long things take. You don't build trust overnight. It doesn't happen in one conversation. So while there's certain places you want to get to, you have to factor in the time it takes to bring people with you. And then I think the last thing being is that I love this, meaningful versus glamorized piece of it, that in the end, that we get away from worrying about what the social media post is going to look like and how we're going to make it look pretty, and understand that some of this is really messy and uncomfortable and very uncomfortable, right? And that the discomfort is the only way to bring true change.
And it's okay.
And it's really okay. Yeah. All right. So we'll be back really shortly with a 3rd episode on multinational DEI strategies. Stay tuned. Bye.
Here it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with. Learn how to lead and stay